Fact.
Fiction.
Both.
Fiction.
Fiction. Fiction.
Probably fiction.
Fiction.
Yeah, I think the story of Noah's Ark, the broad principles of it are true, yeah.
Fiction. Fiction.
Fiction.
Fact.
Yeah, I think the story of the Exodus, again, the broad details are true.
Probably fact.
Fact.
I don't know.
Fact-ish.
I think probably fact.
Yeah, I do believe the feeding of the 5,000 was real.
Fact.
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 Fiction. I think it's not so much that it did not happen. A miracle did happen there, but I think sometimes how the Bible narrates some stories, it leaves out aspects of things. There is something in communal living where probably people would be inspired to share their food that they already had. And there is something in how Jesus speaks in parables and ways that encourages a different understanding of how things happen. So it made me think of kind of like our bring and share. We get to feed a lot more people when we do that.
I sincerely hope that's fact.
No, I don't believe that at all. No, I'm joking. Sorry. Yeah, I believe that Jesus was crucified and I believe that he was raised in the body.
Fact.
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 Absolute fact.
So interestingly, Aesop's fables and the Bible, but Aesop's fables specifically, is not something that I grew up with. I grew up in South Africa and had to look up what Aesop's stories are for myself. It reminded me of similar folklore stories that are told, you know, likening an event and finding again that message within it. So there are Bible stories. The parables of Jesus are more like stories told of everyday events, but with a significant kingdom message. The story of David and Goliath in the Old Testament could be likened to one of Aesop's stories with the lion and the gnat, for an example. You know, so something very small and insignificant and probably not strong defeating something great. And I can remember stories my grandma used to tell us around the family fire at night that were meant to teach us something great about living. So there is something about culture and community stories that are then used and carried forward. And that is what some of those Bible stories are.
Aesop's fables are a wonderful collection, of course, of just very short, concise, very simple stories with a very clear moral point, generally, or a very clear message. And in some ways, they're very similar to bits of the wisdom tradition in the Bible. Proverbs, perhaps in particular, some of the sayings of Jesus, some of bits of maybe the book of James, which isn't quite so narrative, but does have those kind of simple moral messages in places. But what the Bible isn't, and what the sayings of Jesus rarely are, is simple and straightforward. So although perhaps it has similarities with things like Proverbs, I think I would also want to draw on that part of the wisdom tradition in the Bible, which is much messier and much more complex and doesn't come up with simple answers, like Ecclesiastes or Job, that recognise that life can be difficult, that sometimes the answers are beyond our understanding. And Aesop's fables are glorious little stories, but life isn't always as neat as they suggest. Sometimes the hare really does win the race. Quite often the hare really does win the race and the poor old tortoise is left plodding along behind. And I think sometimes maybe the Bible has more to say than to the tortoise, who might feel like a loser in life's race.